Before I go on to the main purpose of my talk, we've had some really interesting observations about coercion today already, and I took a few notes listening to Greg Pike's talk, and somebody mentioned during the Q&A about China. And I have a whole chapter on China in my book, Abolition of Woman, but I don't have time really to talk about China in particular today. But the coercion situation in China is particularly egregious because it is part of China's policy. They have family planning policies, and yet Western aid agencies and Western governments, including our own parliament, claim that there is no coercion in China, even though you need permission to have a baby. So by definition, there is coercion in China. Yet I have heard Baroness Tong claim that abuses don't happen in China. I would urge you, please, to read not just my book, but Steve Mosher's work on the situation in China. Also, trafficking was raised. And there was a study also quoted in my own work which looked at the fact that the majority of trafficking victims have contact with medical facilities, including abortion facilities. And in one case, a girl had multiple abortions performed by the doctor who was one of her clients. I don't want to say the word client because actually he was the pimp's client, not her client, since she was a minor. But that was the way it happened. And Planned Parenthood is a particular favourite within trafficking because, I quote, they ask no questions. So this is a huge issue, and it's a great pleasure to be back to talk to you. I feel like the errant daughter returning because I worked for many years for SPUC. And coercion, in my opinion, is the enormous trumpeting elephant in the room when it comes to abortion. I find it interesting that having spent years researching the whole range of life issues, that coercion is taken completely seriously and is central to the debate when it comes to other life issues, such as euthanasia, but is completely ignored when it comes to abortion. Why is it that when it comes to euthanasia, we acknowledge, albeit grudgingly at times, that a person may feel coerced into choosing assisted suicide, but society generally assumes that a woman choosing abortion cannot possibly feel under pressure to walk inside that facility? To acknowledge or even consider the possibility of coercion is to challenge the prevailing narrative that abortion is a form of empowerment. And it's with the euthanasia debate that I would like to begin. The fear of coercion, most specifically the fear of being a burden, is a real problem for people struggling with terminal illness, disability, or mental health problems. And it was this concern that led a House of Lords committee to urge unanimously against any change in the law when it investigated euthanasia back in the 90s. The committee warned, "We concluded it was virtually impossible to ensure that all acts of euthanasia were truly voluntary, that any liberalisation of the law in the United Kingdom could not be abused. We were also concerned that vulnerable people, the elderly, the lonely, the sick or distressed, would feel pressure, whether real or imagined, to request early death." But it surely follows that if we fear a vulnerable person may feel coerced into choosing an early death, we should be concerned about the possibility that a pregnant woman may find herself in just that position. A woman in the early stages of an unexpected or difficult pregnancy is herself vulnerable. She may fear that her baby represents an impossible burden on her own resources, or more commonly, on those of a boyfriend or other family member. She may be unwell, frightened, confused, or in a state of denial. And just as it's impossible to see how there could ever be safeguards sufficient to prevent a sick person being coerced into euthanasia, it's nigh on impossible to see how we can create the same safeguards when it comes to abortion. Some years ago, a gentleman who will remain nameless was accused by his former girlfriend very publicly of having forced her into aborting their baby. The story made for very distressing reading, as any story involving abortion inevitably does. The man in question strenuously denied the accusation and successfully sued the newspapers concerned for libel. He was eventually awarded substantial, undisclosed damages and given a written apology. But even before the courts ruled in that man's favour, my first thought when reading that the man was pursuing a libel claim was, I hope these papers have good lawyers and long pockets, because how on earth will they ever prove that that woman was coerced? Even if she was, and it was determined she was not, I'm obliged to say that, how in a court of law could it ever be proven that that woman was left in a situation where she had no choice but to have the abortion, unless someone had taped the man dragging her by the hair into the facility, which I rather doubted anybody had. How could they prove it? Coercion, as we have already discovered today, is an insidiously subtle form of control, which can be very difficult, if not impossible, to quantify. So I'm going to ask for a show of hands here, please, because you've had a lot of time now to think about what coercion is, in your opinion, how you would define it. So my first scenario would be, have the abortion or I'll take things into my own hands. A physical threat. Is that coercion? Hands up, please. Right. I think we're pretty much unanimously in agreement with that. That is coercion. A physical threat is always going to be coercion. Threatening to harm a woman. Incidentally, it's not always understood that within criminal law, threatening to harm a person is also an offence. And this is not as extreme or unusual a situation as it may first appear. Back in 2016, on the streets of London, a young woman called Mallory Bantala was severely beaten up by her ex-boyfriend and an accomplice with the deliberate intention of killing her unborn son, whom Mallory had sworn to protect. The case mirrors a crime in New York in which a woman named Mia Jones was so badly beaten up by her ex-boyfriend that her unborn baby died, and she suffered life-threatening injuries. Again, she had refused to abort their baby. Such incidents are extreme forms of intimate partner violence, but I have been shocked during my years of research by just how frequently women talk about being physically threatened when a pregnancy is inconvenient to a boyfriend, a husband, and sometimes other members of the family. A doctor recently told me that he dealt with a case where when the young girl's pregnancy came to light, it was the boyfriend who became the target of violence. His father was so ashamed of him that he beat him up and threw him out of the house. And that, of course, then put the young woman in a terribly difficult position because she was under pressure then to abort away the problem so he could be reconciled with his family. By the way, they're now happily married and the baby is doing well, thanks to abortion pill reversal. More about that later. According to Women's Aid Federation, between 20 and 30% of women experience physical violence during pregnancy, with the violence being described as severe in 14% of cases. Violence may either begin or escalate during pregnancy. Added to this, as has already been quoted, unintended pregnancy is significantly higher in a relationship where there is violence, particularly sexual violence. Scenario 2. Have the abortion or I'll leave you. The withdrawal of support, is that coercion? Yeah? Okay. That is a very common threat. But what if the threat is just a little bit less specific? If you don't have the abortion, you'll ruin your life. Children are such a nightmare. Generalized scare tactics. We've all heard that comment, particularly when a very young girl becomes pregnant. You will ruin your life. She's ruined her life. Oh, that's the end. Is that coercion? Are scaremongering tactics a form of coercion? Yeah. But it's sort of, we're getting into the sort of yes and no, aren't we? Because I would say it is, simply because it does not give in any way a realistic view of what parenthood is like. Those comments are designed to stop a woman from going ahead with a pregnancy. As Sister Andrea Freiley of Glasgow's own Cardinal Winning Initiative has said, having a baby doesn't end your life, it just changes it. And we know that the reality is more nuanced. I can say this now. My eldest son is 16, and he brushes up pretty respectable. So I think I can say this. When he was born, I don't actually remember very much of the first 6 months. I was in a kind of sleep-deprived trance, and people did tell me that it would be a bit of a nightmare and that my life would be turned upside down by the dirty nappies and the sleepless nights and the expensive childcare and the perpetual vomiting. They didn't tell me that my life would be turned upside down by being loved like that. They didn't tell me how it would feel to have a small child in my arms saying, "I love you, Mummy." While I'm here, I'm getting text messages from my daughter saying, "Miss you, when you're coming home?" And, it tugs at the heartstrings. But the fact that having a baby involves the development of a relationship that is so intense and so beautiful is not something anybody talks about when you're pregnant, particularly when you're young and pregnant. Parenting is just a huge emotional roller coaster, and it's not the panacea of all joy, nor is it a road to enslavement. It's part of the natural order of things. Perhaps we should try to remember that and treat it as such. Okay, another scenario for you. If you don't have an abortion, you'll ruin your health. You'll probably die. The use of medical misinformation, we've had lifestyle scaremongering, how about medical scaremongering? Is this coercion? Yes, of course it is, because if a woman is told she's going to die if she has her baby, of course she's going to feel pressured into an abortion. The name Savita, I should think, is familiar to everybody here. And she was an Indian-born dentist living in Ireland who died as a result of a septic miscarriage. I spent quite some time looking over the results of that inquiry into Savita's death, and it was very clear to me that her death was caused by a tragic chain of missed opportunities. The failure of departments to communicate with one another in a timely manner, the failure to act upon serious indications that her condition was deteriorating. Savita's husband had every right to be angry about her death, as no pregnant woman in a developed country should be left to die. But Ireland's pro-life laws were never the culprits there. The name returned to haunt us all earlier this year when an American woman named Andrea Prudent was travelling in Malta with her boyfriend when her placenta ruptured. She was rushed to hospital and her condition was carefully monitored, but when she was refused an abortion, she went to the media. She was so traumatized that she went to the media, claiming her life was at risk. Headlines around the world spoke of fears for American women's safety in anti-abortion Malta. I just hope I escape this backward country with my life. First of all, I have a lot of respect for Malta's pro-life laws because I exist as a result of Malta's pro-life laws. When my mother was a Maltese, when my mother was being put under pressure to get rid of a problem, she could say to her doctor, "What you're asking me to do is immoral and illegal. No, I'm not going to abort away the problem in private, thank you." While all of this was going on, I genuinely think she believed that her life was in danger, but it never was. Her insistence that she could not trust the obstetricians and gynecologists of Malta's Mater Dei hospital were frankly insulting, as Pro-Life Malta has a considerably better record on maternal health than either the United Kingdom or the US. In a statement responding to the case, Malta's Doctors for Life affirmed, "We genuinely empathise with the apprehension of the couple in question and want to emphasise the practice at Mater Dei Hospital always seeks to ensure that the mother's life is always protected and given priority. Whenever such a case presents to hospital, a careful assessment is made to assess the severity of the condition. The patient is intensively monitored and properly treated for any signs of infection. If serious hemorrhage or infection supervenes, then the uterus is always evacuated, and such a decision is taken at the highest clinical level and would involve at least 2 consultants. Premature rupture of membranes does not always result in infection, and not all such pregnancies end in spontaneous miscarriage. This practice has stood the test of time, and our 0% maternal mortality for the last 12 years attests to that. Professor George Jeffrey Buttigieg reminded the media, who ignored him, that Malta has the finest maternal health record in the world, and said, "Our pro-life laws protect lives rather than ending them, and we should be proud to be world leaders when it comes to maternal health care." But Andrea appears to have sincerely believed that she was in mortal danger. And if that is the case, who lied to her? Who manipulated a woman into believing her life hung in the balance? Because manipulated she clearly was. Okay, final scenario played out in abortion facilities and sex education classes and conversations about abortion hundreds of times a day, every day. Just have the abortion, it's no worse than a heavy period. Deliberate misinformation about the abortion process. Is that coercion? This is where it gets a little bit more complicated. Okay, I would argue, and I may be a little bit out on a limb here, that there is a strong case for saying that deliberately withholding information from a woman in a way that's likely to influence her decision is a form of coercion. In any other field of medicine, if a doctor intentionally misled a patient about the seriousness of a procedure, he would risk being struck off. A doctor is obliged to warn a patient about any risks which may be life-changing, fatal, or minor but common. This can sometimes border on the absurd. I have screamed in agony, barely hearing the anaesthetist saying, "I'm legally obliged to tell you there is a 1% chance that if I give you this anaesthesia, you may experience headaches." And I've said, "For God's sake, hit me over the head with a cricket bat. I don't care." But for all my protestations, no needle has gone anywhere near my person until I've been aware of the risks. Because it's a matter of principle. A core principle of consent is surely the right to give informed consent. If a person does not know to what they are consenting, they're not giving free and full consent. And anyone who's been involved in the pro-life movement knows that the truth about abortion is concealed on every level. The deception begins with the description of the unborn child. Abortion practitioners and campaigners have developed such imaginative and unscientific expressions as the products of conception, the contents of the uterus, pregnancy tissue, fetal tissue, and in some cases, parasite, hijacker, and invader. During none of my pregnancies did any midwife ask me how my hijacker was coping. Or, was I holding back on the coffee for the sake of the parasite? It's the sort of language you only ever hear in abortion. It's telling when, back in 2015, the abortion industry's trade in baby body parts was exposed. Planned Parenthood's Cecile Richards continued to refer to our involvement with fetal tissue research, whilst Planned Parenthood members were caught on camera discussing baby eyeballs. The deliberate concealment of the truth about surgical abortion is unlike anything I've come across in any other area of medicine. The literature produced by abortion facilities inevitably refers to the gentle suction required to relieve a woman of the products of conception. It's instructive to compare the patronizing tone employed in these instances with patient information on pretty much anything else. Like nervy women, like nervy children, women considering abortion are reassured that a gentle suction method is used to remove the pregnancy from the uterus. A suction machine will be used to gently complete the evacuation. The dilapan works by gently opening the cervix, and the cervix must be prepared to cause it to gently dilate over a few hours. Ladies, I don't know how many of you have given birth, but the cervix never gently dilates. Ever. Just saying. I've never heard the word gentle used like that in anything other than the medical literature put out by abortion facilities. It's difficult to see how women can be expected to feel empowered to make a free decision if they're treated like panicky infants in need of constant reassurance. It'll all be very gentle, you know. I have had students, I know Margaret's had a rather bad experience recently in Edinburgh, sorry to bring that up. But hey, it's a kind of badge of honour really these days. I've had students angrily denounce me, not through a megaphone, for making the point that doctors know perfectly well what they are doing. But this is the ugly reality, and if you don't want to take a pro-life doctor's word for it, now, abortion doctors who change their mind, like Bernard Nathanson and Anthony Levatino, are pretty blunt about what they were doing, about the lives they took. But how about taking seriously the words of a completely unrepentant Planned Parenthood practitioner who was secretly filmed stating, "Ignoring the fetus is a luxury of activists and advocates. I think we should be less about denying the reality of those images and more about acknowledging that, yeah, that's quite a truth. So let's just give them all the violence. It's a person it's killing. Let's just give them all that." And then the more compelling question is, so why is this the most important thing I could do with my life? But I would say that the more compelling question is, do you give that truth to your patients? Do you speak so bluntly and honestly about the violence of abortion to the women who come to your clinics? Because if you do not, you are colluding in a cruel act of deception that is unjustifiable in every way. I would like to know if any abortion practitioner would ever look a woman in the eye and say, okay, if I perform an abortion, this is what it will involve. These are the instruments, and let me talk you through the process, step by step. I don't know if one abortion practitioner has ever done that. If medical teams, counsellors, and the literature itself are not giving women an accurate description of what they are consenting to, they are not consenting, they are being coerced. A major argument very recently behind the buffer zone legislation was that women need protecting from people who may pressure them into not having an abortion by their presence outside these facilities. But such an argument cuts both ways, surely. A pro-life campaigner might make the case that if abortion facilities told women the whole truth about abortion, they would have nothing to fear from members of the public who stand outside facilities and do just that. These vigils, which many pro-life campaigners admit to finding a serious strain, may represent the one and only last chance for a woman to hear an alternative to abortion. I was very touched hearing Hayley saying that she felt angry that they weren't there, because I have heard that said before, or even worse, heard of women coming out of the clinic and seeing the people there and saying, if you'd been there an hour ago, I would not have gone in. Incidentally, some years ago, this debate about buffer zones has been going on for years. I was at an entirely pro-abortion discussion panel in Oxford where this topic came up. And feminist writer Naomi Wolf made the point, and she's completely in favour of abortion. She writes articles called Our Bodies, Ourselves. She said, if women are upset by the presence of people praying out facilities, then they need to be upset. She represented the only really refreshing radical feminist voice on that. Are pro-life vigils upsetting? Well, they might be, but we're women, not children. We don't need people to cover up our eyes and censor what we're permitted to see. Surely. It was the first time I'd ever heard a radical feminist say that. It goes without saying that if the unpalatable details of the abortion process are not volunteered to women, the possible psychological consequences will not be discussed either. Furthermore, there is a strong correlation between coercion and post-abortion trauma. I've read about and listened to probably hundreds of accounts now by women who have regretted their abortions. And contrary to popular belief, there weren't very many common threads. The women came from different countries, cultures, religions, socioeconomic backgrounds. They were different ages, sometimes different generations. But the one common thread that ran through practically every one of those stories was the sense of having been coerced. Either saying, I had no choice, my family would not have supported me, my father would have kicked me out, I was told I was selfish, stupid, all the things we've heard today. Or the woman will say, I had no idea it would be like that. I was told it was just cells, it was a blob, it would be like a heavy period. They said I'd feel relieved. No one told me it would be painful, traumatic, life-altering. No one bothered to tell me I'd still be grieving for my child 40 years later. It does not surprise me that the abortion industry will not do women the courtesy of acknowledging the pain of post-abortion trauma. After the Irish referendum, PAT was dismissed as a makey-uppy thing that doesn't exist in the Irish Parliament. Because how can an industry be expected to admit to the existence of a problem it may have created through its own inability to tell the truth about the service it provides? It also came as little surprise when Mary Stopes International showed its commitment to choice by going after two Catholic doctors who were providing abortion pill reversal treatment. Dr. Riley, are you still here? Where are you? Hey! Dr. Eileen Riley and Dr. Dermot Carney were reported to the General Medical Council and were subjected to a lengthy and traumatic disciplinary process, during which they faced the prospect of being struck off and losing their careers, not to mention their reputations. They were eventually exonerated, but the almost diabolically aggressive way in which these doctors were treated by the industry for attempting to give women a real choice raised many questions about the abortion industry's true agenda when it comes to the promotion of DIY abortion. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail now about pills by post because it's already been covered, but as you'll know now, COVID was used as a smokescreen to promote selling pills by post. The Abortion Act demanded that abortions be carried out in a registered clinical setting, so this was quite a big change. And when RU486 is taken, it involves two pills being taken 24 hours apart, and it's that 24-hour gap that can be so excruciating for the woman, and it's after taking that first pill that some women start to experience regret and a desire to stop or reverse the process. Abortion pill reversal offers the only lifeline to a distraught woman desperately trying to save her baby. It involves prescribing progesterone until around 14 weeks, but it's a lifeline that MSI was determined to cut by attacking the UK's true practitioners, both highly experienced doctors with unblemished reputations in their fields. Their opponents went so far as to claim that Dr. Carney's Catholicism rendered him incapable of practicing medicine of this nature objectively. Do you want to have a think about that for a moment? An abortion chain with close links to the NHS and the government basically suggested that Catholics can't be trusted as doctors. The GMC have yet to respond adequately to a complaint about that stance, and I suspect probably never will. Let's return to penal times again, please. But what Dr. Carney pointed out to me was that not just some, but all the women who contacted him for abortion pill reversal treatment felt coerced into having abortions. All of them. And not just by parents. In some cases, the woman was told by social services that if she had that baby, it would be immediately taken from her. We touched upon forced abortion and forced adoption earlier. But imagine that. You're vulnerable, you're young, you're pregnant, and a social worker says, well, don't bother, because if you have the baby, we'll take it. You'll never see it again. Right. Peer pressure does not stop being a problem when a girl leaves the school playground. And in the age of social media, I think it's actually even more of a problem. So if every single woman who turned to abortion pill reversal to save their baby admitted to feeling coerced into getting rid of it, what does it say about the so-called objective counselling women are supposed to get before the procedure? If women are changing their minds mid-process, what checks and balances are in place to protect women from being pushed into abortions they don't want? Bear in mind also, we only have the feedback from women who change their mind and feel able to act upon that change of mind. We can never know how many women take that second pill with a heavy heart, believing that it's too late to do anything about it. The work of Dr. Carney and Dr. Riley in the field of abortion pill reversal treatment has exposed the ugly truth behind pills by post. Far from giving women choice, it removes any protection from women who are under pressure to abort. I don't know how many of you have been following what's happening in the States at the moment with the reversal of Roe v. Wade. But it's becoming increasingly popular in certain feminist circles in the US for activists to dress up in long red dresses and white bonnets as a nod to Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale. The implication being that the overturning of Roe v. Wade reduces women to the status of the handmaids in Atwood's dystopian novel, deprived of all rights over their own bodies, relegated to the role of breeders in a world where infertility has become a curse threatening the world's future. The only problem I have with this use of symbolism is that it is nonsense. It is actually rubbish. It is embarrassing. There is a huge moral difference between a society that protects human life and a society built on rape and slavery. Furthermore, it is hypocritical nonsense, because what these groups deliberately ignore is the fact that we have created the world of the Handmaid's Tale. It exists under our very noses. Furthermore, this world of the Handmaid's Tale is ignored and even condoned by the very groups and individuals who claim to care about women's rights. I realise that the main focus of today is abortion, but abortion does come into this field as well, and that is commercial surrogacy, sometimes euphemistically referred to as fertility tourism. This is a system through which wealthy Western couples travel to developing countries to buy themselves a womb to incubate their IVF embryo. The surrogates are housed in dormitory-style buildings, often separated from their families for the duration of the pregnancy. They're kept under constant observation, forced to take a battery of drugs. In many cases, they will have signed contracts they cannot read, in a language they may not understand, and the medical terminology is never explained. If the couple get cold feet and decide against having the baby, or something is found to be wrong with the baby, the surrogate may be forced to undergo an abortion, whatever her feelings on the matter. During my research for Abolition of Women, I came across studies warning that in some cases, surrogates were not even consulted. They were given abortion pills without their knowledge, then told that they had suffered a miscarriage and would not be getting their fee. What is this other than the hell of the Handmaid's Tale, in which the poverty trap is used to force women to become breeders for infertile couples, whilst their enslavement is justified through a toxic neo-colonial narrative in which these women are expected to be pathetically grateful to be exploited in this way, in exchange for money that in no way compensates for the trauma they go through. Perhaps the most heinous attack on women's rights is sex-selective abortion, a practice that occurs all over the world, including in Britain. In their book, Half the Sky, Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Wu Dunn write, More girls have been killed in the last 50 years precisely because they were girls than men were killed in all the wars of the 20th century combined. More girls are killed in this routine gendercide in any one decade than people were slaughtered in all the genocides of the 20th century. Sex-selective abortion is an attack on women at every level, eliminating a baby girl for being a girl, and sex-selective abortion almost always targets girls. And subjecting a pregnant woman to the trauma of an oft unwanted abortion to satisfy a family's desire to avoid having a daughter. The consequences for women of the gender imbalance caused by sex-selective abortion are many and complex. They include increased instances of infanticide, rape, kidnap, baby smuggling, bride purchase, trafficking, so-called levirate marriage, where a woman is obliged to marry her dead husband's brother, and wife sharing, where they don't even wait for the man to die. However, what is much less closely scrutinised is the devastating impact that it has upon the mothers themselves. Women who are coerced into aborting a baby girl. Bear in mind, sex-selective abortion also occurs later in pregnancy, usually because there has to be an ultrasound, which increases the trauma. And in these cases, the pressure can come not just from husbands, but also from other family members. I came across a particularly haunting case in India, which currently has the biggest sex-selective abortion problem anywhere in the world. And in this case, a woman was forced to undergo 2 late-term abortions of baby girls. In both cases, she claimed that when the sex of the baby was revealed, and it's illegal, in fact, to reveal the sex in India, she was repeatedly beaten, not just by her husband, but by her father-in-law, until she was simply too frightened to hold out any longer. On another occasion, I was personally involved in an asylum case, which involved a Chinese couple who had broken the country's draconian family planning laws. The woman, whose name I'm withholding because they are sadly now back in Beijing, had been forced to have 2 late abortions of baby girls, and was suffering from very severe PTSD. She was told repeatedly she must have a boy. 10 years after that first abortion, she was still suffering the crippling psychological and emotional effects of losing her daughters. It was one of the most extreme cases I've ever seen. She actually, the only way she could cope with it was fantasizing that the babies had never died. The girls would have been aged about 10 and 8, and she'd given them names and backstories, and she talked about them as if they were still alive. And the Home Office said she was therefore a liar and threw her out of the country. Some groups, in fairness, are speaking openly about the dangers of sex-selective abortion, but remain evasive when it comes to talking about abortion itself, or simply justify it because it is abortion. One Guardian journalist claimed, "What about when a pregnant woman lives in a society that gives her real and considerable reason to fear having a girl? The kind of society where dowry systems mean an inconveniently gendered child could bankrupt a family, or one where a livid patriarch, deprived of a male heir, could turn his fury on both mother and daughter. In those situations, a woman wouldn't just be justified in seeking sex-selective abortion, she'd be thoroughly rational to do so." Now, it has always troubled me that self-proclaimed feminists apparently believe that sacrificing the lives of baby girls in the name of appeasing violent misogyny is ever acceptable. Supporting abortion for women who are being threatened into it by violent men is to condone medical rape, because forced abortion is surely medical rape. It should not be seen in any other way. And if feminists really believe in the right to bodily integrity, this should be completely unacceptable. Nor should we make the mistake of thinking that this sort of pressure only occurs in other countries. Some years ago, some of you may remember, some undercover journalists filmed themselves asking for sex-selective abortion. They went to various clinics and said, oh, pregnant with a girl, don't want her. Oh, that's fine, we'll sign the form, off you go. One doctor actually said, well, that's not fair. That's kind of female infanticide, isn't it? And then he signed the abortion form to collude with the female infanticide. And this did cause a little bit of an uproar. The government, my memory escapes me as to which prime minister we had at the time, conducted an investigation. Sorry, I'm obviously getting old or something. They carried out an investigation which was basically a whitewash, in which they concluded sex-selective abortion did not happen in Britain. There was no evidence that there was a problem. The independent newspaper which had initiated this whole story conducted its own investigation. And what they did was to look at the sex ratio, not just of first babies, but of second, third, subsequent babies down the line in a family. And this is quite a crucial point. Normally, the male-female sex ratio at birth should be about 1-to-1, but more like 104 boys to 100 girls. That is regarded as a natural discrepancy. It's a kind of way that nature compensates for the fact that boys are more likely to die in infancy and that men are stupid and have more accidents. So by the time they get to adulthood, this is actually true, men have more accidents than women do, okay? So by the time they reach adulthood, they should be about 1-to-1. The ratio should be 1-to-1. So if there is a big discrepancy, you know that something is wrong. And in some parts of India, for example, the ratio is skewed as 140 boys to 100 girls, which is a huge discrepancy. That's a major, major demographic problem. It's never good for a society to have a massive surplus of single men who can never marry and establish a family. So the independent newspaper looked at sex ratios for subsequent births, and what they found was that the ratio was more or less normal for the first baby and the second, because even with a strong son preference, a couple may be prepared to welcome a daughter as a first child. But that the further along the babies got in the family, the more skewed the sex ratio became, as families became desperate to have that much desired son. And the same results were found in studies in Canada and the US. Anne Farady of BPAS claimed that no one ever asks for a sex-selective abortion unless they're a journalist, when the former medical director of her own organisation, Dr. Vincent Argent, has stated that sex-selective abortion is widespread and it happens in all communities. When sex-selective abortion was being debated in Parliament, I heard passionate assurances from abortion providers that no woman who enters a facility is coerced into having an abortion she does not want. Such women are identified and empowered to make the decision that's right for them, without any information being given about how, in practice, this is supposed to happen. And such assurances fly in the face of both recent studies on coercion, as has already been seen, and the lived reality of those who work with women to pick up the pieces. I'm going to end with a case that I think is particularly instructive, and that is of a young woman by the name of Samira, though that is not her real name, who described to a journalist being forced to abort a baby girl. She said, "On the day of the termination, I went into the clinic crying. I was crying and could not stop. The nurse saw I was upset and said, 'Just put these tablets inside you.' They weren't concerned that this person looked upset. I was crying, but I was trying to be careful, because what if they didn't go ahead with the abortion and then my husband would blame me? I just wanted them to stop. I just wanted to run away from there. But the thing is, where would I run away to? What would I do? The last day before I had the abortion, I said to my husband very clearly that what he was doing was wrong. I felt I couldn't make the choice on my own, because if I didn't make that choice and go ahead with the baby, he would actually end the pregnancy himself. He would probably beat me up to such a state there would be no pregnancy inside of me, and I was scared of that. The worst thing was, when I went in, I had a bump, and when I came out, there was no bump. I kept touching it, and I just wanted to scream. but the noise wouldn't come out. I just wanted my baby back. There are a number of things to consider with that statement. Firstly, consider her dilemma. She's distraught, but part of her desperately wants to conceal how she's feeling because she's afraid of the consequences if she goes home and she's still pregnant. But the fact was, it was very clear this woman was in severe distress. She did not want to be there. And I can't think of another situation where this would be regarded as ethical. I actually asked Dermot Carney, I said, have you ever had a situation, he's a cardiologist mostly, but I said, have you ever had a situation where you're performing some procedure on a patient and she's really distraught? Would you just ignore it? He said, well, of course I wouldn't. If I've had a woman in floods of tears, I'd say, or a patient, whoever, I'd say, can we talk? Can we communicate? Is there a problem? How can we help you? You don't just power through with a medical procedure when the patient is clearly very unwilling. It's unethical, unless, of course, it is an emergency and you can't stop. It is possible to make a case that the majority of abortions are coercive if one considers the many obstacles that prevent a woman from giving a full informed consent in this country. And I suppose the question is, where do we go from here? There needs to be a concerted campaign, not just to inform the public about the reality of abortion, because we have kind of been doing that for 50 years, but we need to continue to, because they're not going to hear it anywhere else, but to raise awareness about the reality of coercion, and therefore the myth of choice as it currently stands. Choice is the consumerist society's false god, and it needs dragging down. After 50 years of argument in this country, it may be time to break it to the public that abortion is not just an attack on life, it is an attack on truth, and therefore ultimately an attack on freedom. Thank you.